This demonstration is to explain clipping and ironing your curves when you sew. In the last video that I recorded, easing that curved seam and actually sewing that curved seam, I showed how to clip these curves. So I'll go back over that and then I will show how to iron it. You can see here that the straight part of the garment or the seam that you sewed does not need to be clipped. It lays flat on its own. However, what I've sewn that's curved has a little bit of extra fabric to deal with here, and it tends to bunch up and stay pretty tense when it is sewn. So I've put a few clips in the seam allowance. That's a really important thing to do as you sew your curves and iron them. So I have clipped just the curved section, just here. I don't need to clip the whole seam if it's not curved, but where it does curve, I have clipped every ½ inch or so. And you can see that I've clipped close to, but not through that seam. If I clip the seam itself, I will have a hole and I will have to go back over that and repair it. So you want to make sure that you don't clip too far, but again, that you're clipping through the majority of that seam allowance. And this will allow this seam to relax. You can see that the seam allowance can kind of splay open here, and that will reduce the tension in your curves. It's very important to go back and clip the curves in the garments that you make. Otherwise, sometimes they don't lay correctly on the body. They don't fit properly. Often people can't get dresses with sleeves or jackets on because armscye, the sleeve curves are not clipped. So that's an important thing to think about. What I'm going to do here now is I have my pressing ham. You can see that. It's perfect. It's the perfect tool for pressing out my curves. So I can lay my seam over this pressing ham and then use my fingers to get the seam allowance to lay open and then press on top of it, and it will assist me in this whole process. So you can see me running my iron down the center of that seam allowance. Gigantic iron, sorry. And then as I approach the curve, I'm going to gently, you can see here, gently stretch this piece over the curve of the ham. And the ham has two curved ends. One is a little tighter curve than the other, so you can find the curve that fits your piece best and then use your fingers. It's a little tricky to do on camera in a small space, but that's okay. Use your fingers to get these pieces open and press them. So you can see that here. I've got the pieces open and you can see them, they will start to either splay out or overlap. You can see that some of these overlap, whereas these splay out a little bit more. And the fabric will do what it naturally wants to do in order to lay flat for you. So it does require a little bit of patience, a little bit of extra time, but do not skip this step when you're sewing your curves. I'm going to do this off camera for just a second so I have a little bit more room, and then I will show you what it looks like. Okay, now you can see here that I've pressed this entire seam as smooth as I can get it. Again, some of my seam allowances will splay apart, whereas some will overlap each other a little bit. That's okay, that is exactly what it wants to do. Then we'll turn it to the right side and we will look at our curve and determine if that's what we want it to look like. If there are no accidental tucks, little folds in it, then we're good to go. Occasionally you might get a tiny little bit of a pucker, and often these can be steamed out, meaning you can stretch it over the ham just a little bit and apply a little heat and steam, and you can get everything to relax for you. Again, if you have a true fold that you've actually stitched over in that seam, you would want to go back and repair that portion. But I've been able to steam out any puckers that took place there in the corner.